The feminist who came to this pageant set up a freedom trash can where they tossed in instruments of female torture to signify that they were no longer willing to be under these constraints. What did the 1960s mean to me? Well, that was a very important decade because that's when I was born. But even before I could walk or speak, I think the 60s started to define my worldview. And one of the most significant events of the 60s that definitely has influenced the person I am today was the feminist women's movement of the 1960s. But before I get to that, I need to back up for a couple of decades. The 1940s were a decade of big change in the world because of World War II. Men had to go off to war, women stayed home and kept everything working at home, and together, men and women defeated evil. They came together, Hitler was defeated, and the outcome was what the world wanted. So we all returned to what we consider to be our normal world after the war. So enter the 1950s. Everyone has returned to their traditional roles. Women are back in the home, keeping care of the children and the household. Men have returned to the workforce. And I think that worked for a little while because people wanted a return to normalcy. But then probably somewhere near the end of the 50s, early 60s, women started to look around and remembered, you know, I had some autonomy, I had some independence in the 1940s, and I've lost all of that. I'm not the person that I was then, but I want to get that person back. So enter the 1960s. I believe that the 1960s brought around a coalescence of a mind melding of women where a majority of women were all thinking the same thing. We want equal rights, we want to be able to live the lives that we want. We don't want to be confined to traditional roles anymore. One of the most significant things that happened in the 1960s was the 1968 Miss America pageant. The feminist who came to this pageant set up a freedom trash can where they tossed in instruments of female torture to signify that they were no longer willing to be under these constraints. Their intent was to demand respect and autonomy in converse to the objectification and focus on appearance of women. Then we work back to a few decades prior to the 1920s, and in 1923, the Equal Rights Amendment came to being. Although it was developed in 1923, it took until 1972 for Congress to present it to the states for ratification. Here we are, and many decades later in 2025, and there are still 18 states who have not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, so it has not been added to the US Constitution. I would be remiss to not mention Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was instrumental in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. He was silenced for his beliefs because of the deep fear of change. The idea that women and people of color could profoundly upset the power structure of Western society persists today. In closing, the 1960s mean to me an era of transformation, courage, and awakening. It was a time of bold, visible acts of defiance. People stood up, rejected the status quo, and paved the way for a more equal, expressive, and creative future. The decade still inspires me to question, to create, and to stand up for what I believe in.